And I think we're live. So before anybody gets here, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are. For me, it's just past midnight on Thursday, September 26th. So that makes this the news for Wednesday, September 25th, day 946 of Vladimir Putin's war of aggression against the people of Ukraine. I'm Peter Alexievich, and I'm coming to you live at 5 from Kyiv, Ukraine. Now, I'm just going to run over here real quick and bring up my live and make sure that it's working. Looking good there. Coming to you live at 5. Whoops. And Darlene is here. Anthony Tommy Tom is here. Rob Walker is here. Eli is here. Hey guys, how's everybody doing tonight? So, can you hear me okay? Can we do a sound check real quick? Darlene, Rob, can you guys hear me? Check 2, 3. Hey Fitz, am I coming through? Oh wait, I can check it myself. How's everybody doing tonight? There we go. Hey Paul Smith. Loud and clear. Well, the peeps are coming in. So again, guys, this is the Live at 5 for Wednesday, September 25th, day 946 of Russia's war of aggression against the people of Ukraine. And I'm Peter Alexievich. It's 5 o'clock in New York, but of course, here in Kyiv, it's just past midnight. And it's a long day, boy. Okay. So let's get started then, and we'll start, as we always do, by thanking the sponsors. And for this week, for this kind of test drive on YouTube, I wanted to call out these 5 guys who I've labeled the board of directors. And that's Ballerina, Bobby, Dark Irish, Jason Willis Starr, and Lars from Encino Tech. And these guys are stalwart supporters of the channel. I cannot thank them enough for their support over the last year. In the case of some of these guys, like Bobby, a year and a half now, almost since the very beginning. So as we kind of test drive the YouTube experience, these guys are my sponsors for the week. And for next week when we get back on TikTok as well, because not only do they deserve the recognition, but additionally, this week, nobody's going to know that they did anything, right? Because it's just the 30 of us here every night. The stalwarts, the diehards, I swear, every person here I know, and most of you have been with us since the beginning. So I'm deeply appreciative of you all making the transition over here. What I'm thinking is that next week we ought to be able to stream on both platforms. And I think I have a mechanism here that in YouTube, I think this graphical environment is much better for everything. Although I'm interested to know what you think. Hey, Clay made it. So send me feedback, DM me or email me. If anybody's got any feedback, I'm interested to hear it. All right, so let's start off, as we always do, with the overnight missile and drone attacks. We saw last night territorial defense and the Air Force is doing a phenomenal job with the drones. It's 100% interception last night. 28 of 32 were shot down, and then another 4 were lost to electronic warfare. That's 100%. And that's of the drones. Now, of the missiles, the news is not so great. Those anti-ship missiles, those KH-59-69s, all 4 of the 4 that were sent were shot down. Ukraine has a great record knocking those out of the sky. But it is much harder with those S-300s targeting Kharkiv. They're in the air for less than 2 minutes. It's just over the border, bang, they're there. And of the one S-300 sent last night, it was not intercepted. Neither were 3 unidentified missiles. Now again, you know what I think. I think those unidentified missiles have to be the Iranian ones. And I keep expecting that we're going to get an announcement from Kyiv verifying that, in fact, these are Iranian missiles that have been coming in from the Russians. But to date, we do not yet have that. We don't yet have that information for sure. Still unidentified. And 3 of them got through last night. Now, this just happened. These pictures were shared by the National Police, and right now they're still digging through the rubble in Kramatorsk looking for survivors. So this is still a search and rescue mission. But just about 5 o'clock local time, so about 7 hours ago, glide bombs hit Kramatorsk. The last count that I saw was 1 person killed. I can say that because I can talk like an adult because I'm on YouTube. I don't have to use that stupid unalived bullshit to gloss over the fact that these people are being murdered every day. That's what's going on here. These people are being murdered. They're being tortured. Just at the UN today, there was evidence of the systemic torture of civilians and POWs, Ukrainian civilians and POWs, at the hands of the Russians. More evidence of war crimes every day. It's outrageous. And the other thing about these glide bomb attacks that is so important for all of us to recognize is that the airplanes that carry these bombs are launched from airfields that are within striking distance of storm shadows and ATACMS. And if we just took the gloves off Ukraine, it would make a difference. It would save the lives of Ukrainians and stop this devastation. Earlier in the day, again, glide bombs hit Kharkiv. Again, residential buildings were targeted. Here we lost 3 people and 36 were injured. That was the last count that I saw. The mayor of Kharkiv suggested that that number was likely to rise as a number of people were in critical condition after having been pulled from the rubble of their homes, right? Overnight last night, Russian shelling resulted in casualties, not just in Kramatorsk and Kharkiv, but in Zaporizhia, in Sumy, in Kherson. Over 20 settlements were hit. Yeah, it just goes on. It just goes on. And it's going to go on for as long as we let it. That's the reality. Now, for those who follow the channel, everybody here knows that the Black Sea Fleet used to have its home in Crimea, in Sevastopol. They were ejected from there through the efficient use of storm shadows and ATACMS and the Ukrainians' grinding efforts to make Crimea untenable for the Russians. And they've had real success there. The entire Black Sea Fleet was either sent to the bottom of the sea, or they ran away and they were hiding over in Novorossiysk. Now we have satellite images that show that Novorossiysk is empty, or virtually empty. There's a patrol boat, 1 warship, and a Rapucha-class landing ship left. But that's it. And they're not docked in the Navy part of Novorossiysk. They're parked over on the civilian side, using civilians as cover, right? That's what the Russians do. They use civilians and civilian infrastructure as cover for the military assets. It appears that what the Russians are intent on now is building a new naval base on the Black Sea that will accommodate the Black Sea Fleet, or what's left of it. half of the tonnage is gone. And this is the location, and this is what it currently looks like. Now, this is a tricky bit. It's a tricky bit because it's in Russian-occupied Georgia. Russia is currently holding on to about 20% of Georgia, just like Ukraine, right? They have about 20% of Ukraine. They've got about 20% of Georgia. And this base is in occupied Georgia. So the question arises, if you hit it, are you inviting war with Georgia, or are you inviting Georgia to join the war actively? For his part, Zelensky has said that this is a viable and legitimate target, that if the Russian Black Sea Fleet runs and hides here, they are a legitimate military target, and this would not be considered off limits. As well, it shouldn't. It's not Georgia, right? The Georgians don't have control over it. It's occupied and controlled by the Russians. And that, I think, makes it clear that it should be a target. I'm very hopeful. It's going to be interesting to see what happens on October 26th with the Georgian elections. If the Georgians get together and repudiate Moscow, vote out all those puppets of Saakashvili's, the billionaire who thinks he owns fucking Georgia and who is a close friend to Putin and the Kremlin. If the Georgians eject them all from the assembly and put Western-thinking leaders in charge, we could see real change in Georgia in the next few years. If they don't, or if the Russians subvert those elections to their own will, then Georgia's going to have to struggle. Georgia's going to be struggling for a while yet. Now, this is quite a story. Now, we knew about this. We knew that the Russians were looking at sending missiles to the Houthis. We knew about this because I think it was it was either the Financial Times or the Washington Post. I forget just now. But they reported on this about maybe 4 months ago, early part of the summer, that there were talks between the Houthis and Russia. But what broke yesterday from Reuters was that Iran is brokering those talks to send advanced Russian missiles to the Houthis. Now, based on conversations with 7 sources familiar with the matter, according to Reuters, Iran is brokering a deal to send advanced Russian missiles to the Houthis. This is a development, I think, that highlights both Tehran's growing ties to Moscow and Moscow as the international terrorist state that it is, sowing chaos wherever it can. Remember Get Smart? Is anybody else old enough to remember the television show Get Smart? Remember the bad guys in that were the agents of chaos? Well, who on this planet is more an agent of chaos than Tehran, Moscow, and Pyongyang? I mean, come on. Iran has been brokering talks between Houthi militants in Yemen and the Kremlin gremlins. Several meetings between the Houthis and representatives of the Kremlin have been hosted by Tehran. The talks are said to be ongoing and no decisions have been made regarding the transfer of dozens of Yakunt or P-800 Onyx anti-ship missiles. Now you'll notice the missiles that the Russians are willing to send the Houthis are anti-ship missiles. They have virtually no use for anti-ship missiles in Ukraine. But the Houthis, they can give them to the Houthis, and the Houthis can use them to target Western and European ships traveling the maritime corridors of the Red Sea. That Red Sea up to the Suez Canal is a choke point for international trade. If right now, lots of international trade is avoiding it because of the risks associated with Houthi attacks. Right now, you got ships that are going all the way down around the Cape of South Africa in order to get to their final destinations in Europe or the Americas. That's a long way out of the fucking way. That adds to the cost of the transportation. That drives prices up, pushes inflation. It's a problem. It's a problem. I would hope that our boy Vladimir, mad, bad, sad Vlad, is having second thoughts about sending missiles to the Houthis after the last missile that they sent them hit a fucking Russian-flagged ship, an oil tanker of the Russian Federation. I mean, really, these idiots are all so incompetent that with friends like this, who needs enemies? That should be the tag for BRICS. With friends like this, who needs enemies? Swear to God. These missiles have a 300-kilometer range, that's about 200 miles. Precision weapons that will threaten international maritime shipping lanes. It is my opinion that the growing balls on Tehran, the Houthis, Pyongyang, are all because of our failure to deal with Vladimir Putin in Ukraine. He's going to these guys and he's saying, we're winning. The West is breaking up. It's backing down. It's going to fail. Trust me. Stick with me. Right? They haven't gotten rid of us yet. We're fighting the whole world. And we're hanging on. That's what Putin can go and say to Kim Jong-un. That's what he can say to the mullahs in Iran. And it's a problem. It's a real problem for those of us that think that civilization is a real thing, that the rules-based international order matters. Clay, you'll like this. Well, I don't know. It's sad too in its own way. So these two kids right here, these are two 16-year-old high school kids. And this is just like a story that broke a couple weeks ago. They were approached on Telegram, promised $20,000 if they burned up a Russian military helicopter. So these enterprising youths snuck into the local air base in Omsk, which is home to one of the helicopter brigades, and they threw a Molotov cocktail into this Mi-8. And you can see the damage done. I mean, I don't know if it's beyond repair, but there's a lot of damage to that helicopter. Unfortunately, fortunately, whatever, they were picked up shortly thereafter, assuming that they're even the ones that were responsible, and not just local kids that they're scapegoating. And what will happen to them is anybody's guess. They're probably not getting the 20 grand that they were promised, though. Let's take a look at the Frontline, and we'll do a Frontline update. Now, this is the map of Ukraine, right? This is the map. The camera has me backwards, so it's weird. So this is the map of all of Ukraine. There's the big border, and you can see the troop concentrations of the Russians. Now, what we're going to look at specifically is the Donbass, because that's where all the fighting is, in that Prokof's direction. So if we take a look here, it appears, now, here's what's important about this story. Volodar is a fortress. It is a fortress that was right on the front line of the Donbass war for the last 10 years, since 2014. It is one of the best defended positions on the front line. I would say that the Russians have been trying to take it for 31 months. But that wouldn't be true. They've been trying to take it for 10 years, since the Donbass war started. Now, the last 31 months, they have poured men and equipment into trying to take Volodar until there's nothing left of Volodar to save. I mean, the buildings are all shot up or completely collapsed. It's just an apocalyptic moonscape kind of scene there. We got word today that the 72nd Mechanized Brigade, which has been so valiant in their struggles to defend this fortress, are beginning the process of withdrawal. And so, in the face of overwhelming Russian attack, the Ukrainians, it appears, are about to withdraw from Volodar, and Volodar is about to fall. And that's just the reality of the situation. Now, analysts differ on how important this is. A number of analysts are saying that it doesn't matter, that Volodar is nothing. It doesn't give the Russians any strategic or tactical advantage. However, other folks are pointing out that the Ukrainians don't have good defensive positions to fall back to close to Volodar. They're going to have to fall back multiple kilometers to the next line of defense. And that means essentially ceding all of that land to the Russians. And so we may see after the fall of Volodar, like we did after the fall of Avdiivka, a sudden run of the Russians 10 or 15 kilometers in until they get to the next defensive line. Very much like what happened at Avdiivka. So if in the next week or two you start hearing about, ooh, big Russian advance around Volodar, it's not a Russian advance. The Ukrainians have fallen back to their positions. The Russians are going after them. The gray zone is expanding. That's all that is. There's no real changes. We looked at this map yesterday, the Tourette's direction. In the Tourette's direction, the fighting is ongoing and heavy. But there are no significant changes to the map. You can see on this map, there's that salient into the eastern part of Touretsk. And so now that they're in the city, the worst and hardest of the urban combat is begun. I mean, it's one thing to shell the city from 20 kilometers away. It's another thing to go in there and start clearing houses one by one. I mean, I can't even imagine. It's a nightmare, in my opinion. Same thing here in Chasiv Yar. There's no changes to the map, but the Ukrainians are under heavy assault. And the assaults aren't just coming directly from the east. They're also coming from the north, up here by Kalinivka. And so what it appears that the Russians may be trying to do is take the city from the north, because there is this canal here. This canal forms a natural barrier, and that's what's been keeping the Russians isolated to the canal district of Chasiv Yar and unable to expand from there. Now, what happens with Kalinivka and the advance from the north onto Chasiv Yar is another story. There was a large armored assault from that direction of about 20 vehicles. I think it was 4 tanks, some APV, some armored personnel carriers, and some infantry fighting vehicles, or BMPs. And the column was decimated. I think only 4 vehicles managed to return. So they're facing real challenges coming in from the north, just like they have the obstacles coming in from the east. This is kind of the Donbass all up right here. Here's Pokrovsk. This is an important logistical hub. So it will have, taking Pokrovsk will have operational effects for the Ukrainians. Their whole logistics are staged through here for the Donbass offensive, all the way up to Konstantinivka, Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, and then down to Korotkove, which we looked at yesterday. And the fall of Pokrovsk and the loss of this highway for resupply will be a problem for the Ukrainians. The question is, will the Russians be able to take Pokrovsk before the weather turns bad and everybody's mired in the mud? And I don't have an answer to that. Nobody has an answer to that, right? But if you look on the map, and this is the deep state map, if you look on deep state maps, you will see all those little arrows along the front line. Those indicate the Russian advance, or the axis of attack. And all up and down this line, boy, the Russians are just pouring everything they have in there. We had a briefing from the UK Defense Intelligence Community today, and it said that Russia is ramping up attacks on multiple targets. The effort is designed to stretch Ukrainian forces, but it prevents Russia from massing forces for a more significant effect. For its part, Ukrainian military intelligence today reported that it appears that the Kremlin will continue to prioritize the Donbass offensive over the defense of Kursk, which seems completely crazy to me. You have foreign troops on your soil. One would think that the first priority would be to get rid of them, but no. Putin is trying to grab every inch of the Donbass that he can, in the misguided belief that when Trump comes into office and freezes the conflict here, he'll be able to keep every one of those inches. And I think all of that is nonsense. I don't think any of that will come to pass. Now, Zelensky is at the UN. Real quick on Kursk. No real changes to the map. Some advance out here in the west. I saw one map, not this one, but another mapper, who's got the Ukrainians all the way up just about, 10 kilometers, about 6 miles from Glishkovo. Now, this is a pro-Ukrainian mapper that we're looking at here, who has some relationship with Ukrainian military. Is it possible that they're holding back map updates for operational security reasons? It's entirely possible. And the other map is a better representation. But it's very hard to say. Fog of war and all that. But no major changes in Kursk either. It looks like the Ukrainians are spending their time digging in. Now, our boy Volodymyr here was at the UN today. And you guys know I've been saying that the Russians have destroyed 80% of thermal power plants in Ukraine. Apparently that information is outdated, because according to Zelensky today, the Russians have destroyed all thermal power plants in Ukraine. And winter is coming. Those thermal power plants are how this Eastern European country heats these big apartment blocks. I don't know what we're going to do this winter. I really don't. And a lot of other folks don't either. But it is clearly the intention of the Russians to freeze us in our beds. Zelensky also said, and these were his comments during the UN Security Council meeting, nearly all hydroelectric capacity in Ukraine has been diminished ahead of the winter. He made the point, and I think that it's an extraordinarily valid point, that Russia can only be forced into peace. Russia is never going to be a good faith partner. And I think it's important for all of us to remember that we have been here before. Most of us didn't notice. God knows I didn't notice. In 2014, I was very busy. And I didn't notice the Minsk agreements happening. I didn't notice when they had to happen again in 2015 because the Russians broke their word about the 2014 accords. And we went and we did it again with the Minsk Accords in 2015. Russia is not a good faith partner. The very worst thing that we could possibly do here is freeze this conflict where it is, North Korea style or Ireland style. A nightmarish solution that is only going to let the Russians rebuild their forces and come back at Ukraine again. Zelensky went on to say that we have proof that Russia is planning to target our 3 nuclear power plants. Now, I want to address this because what does that mean, right? What does that mean? It's not likely that it means that the Russians are actually going to fire at the nuclear power plants. Instead, it means that what they will do is hit the open switchgear and the transmission substations to disconnect the nuclear plants from the power grid. Now, this is important because when they're disconnected from the power grid, they shut down. And the reason for that is because they depend on the grid for cooling. And so if they're cut off from the grid, what do? They go into a shutdown mode. And then they stop producing electricity. Then you got to ramp them back up, right? Once they're reconnected to the grid. It is worth pointing out here. So 2 things about this. One, the GUR is making the claim that the Chinese are using their satellite data, their spy satellites, to inform Moscow of the location conditions surrounding the plants today. And so it appears that the axis of evil of Moscow and Beijing, very much in the way that we share intelligence with the Ukrainians, I hope, it looks like the Russians are getting intelligence from the Chinese on this. Now, what is the effect of disconnecting these nuclear power plants from the grid and putting them in shutdown? Well, we know what the effect is because we've seen it before. I would draw your attention to November, I want to say 24th, November 24th, 2023. No, 2022, sorry. November 24th, 2022. Right? This right here is a picture of what Ukraine and the surrounding countries look like at night from space. See right in the middle there, that big bright spot? That's Kyiv. That's where I am. And you can see on a normal night, Ukraine looks like this. The surrounding countries look like this. What happened on November 24th, 2022? Massive Russian missile strike against the nuclear power grid and its connections to the standard power grid. And this is the satellite photo from the next day. Ukraine is in nearly complete darkness, while the rest of the surrounding countries are still shining brightly in the dark. Again, you do this during a cold Ukrainian winter. Grandmothers are going to freeze to death in their beds, which is exactly what the Russians want. Now, I mentioned this yesterday, the failure of the Sarmat RS-28 missile test. It's the 4th test in a row that has failed. And dig this, when I reported on this, what I did not know was that the engines, the rocket engines for these missiles were made in Ukraine. One of the reasons, in all likelihood, that the Russians are having such trouble with these missiles is that they can't get replacement parts. The irony of that is, it makes it, yeah. That's a thing of beauty right there. That's karma. That's karma. Now this right here, this is Minister of Foreign Affairs for Poland, Sikorski. And let me tell you, his speech today at the UN was magnificent. Him and Lamey. I didn't have time to incorporate Lamey's comments. He's the British Foreign Secretary, I think, right? Or Britain's ambassador to the UN, one or the other. But your guy, for all the Brits out there, Anthony Tommy Tom, you can put your fist in the air for Lamey's comments today too. He was on fire, baby, on fire. For his part, Sikorski from Poland he did not pull any punches. In a fact-based, cool, calm, concise way, he led us through all of the evil that the Russians have committed against the people of Ukraine. And then right there on the floor of the UN General Assembly, he looked at the Russian ambassador to the UN and said, how does what you are doing to Ukrainian kidnapped children differ from what German Nazis did to your children and ours? The guy was on fire, and he was on point. That's the thing, right? Like one of the things that the Russians always say is that they won World War I or World War II for everybody. The Great Patriotic War. That's what they tell their people, right? It's that they fought the Nazis, they won the war, they're the heroes. This is bullshit of the first order. They deny the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and that they started World War II by invading and splitting Poland up with their Nazi collaborators, right? These people live in an alternate reality, and it's got to be smashed. At the start of World War II, the Japanese thought that their emperor was a god. They had to be disabused of that to actually have some freedom in the world. The Russians are suffering the same kind of delusions, that they are somehow incapable of error, superior to the rest of the world, a master race, if you will. They must be disabused of this. He went on, how many Russian officials have adopted stolen Ukrainian children? Following the example of Sergei Mironov, former chairman of the Russian Federation Council. When will you return the remaining thousands of stolen Ukrainian children? Do you know that stealing another country's children is tantamount to genocide? Do you remember that diplomats and propagandists of a genocidal regime are also criminals, as the Soviet prosecutors argued at Nuremberg? Remember the lessons of history. Oh, that picture, by the way, that he held up there, that's the picture of the victory parade that the Nazis and the Soviets had when they split Poland up. One invaded from the east, one invaded from the west, they met in the middle, and then they had a victory parade. So this idea that Russia was the hero of World War II, they barely managed to redeem themselves for their own treachery against Poland. And the Polish people remember. They're not having any of it. Sikorski's not having any of it. That was very clear. Now, on this side of the pond, or on the other side of the pond, whatever, Trump was saying some shit that just is so far removed from reality. For example, he said the U.S. has spent $300 billion on Ukraine. Fact, this is on military equipment. Actual spend is $58.5 billion. He called the Europeans deadbeats and said that they didn't pay their fair share, when in fact the actual EU spend is of $209 billion. All up aid for every $100 that the EU contributes, America puts up $68. Right, so to say that the Europeans are not paying their fair share is removed from reality. Our economy is 20% of the world. Our GDP justifies these investments, especially because it's dependent on Ukrainian success, which so many people seem to have failed to grasp. Without a prosperous and secure Europe, America's prosperity is in jeopardy. Every time Zelensky visits the U.S., he leaves with $100 billion. Now, just yesterday at a rally, Trump said he leaves with $60 billion, but today he doubled down. And now every time Zelensky leaves the country, he leaves with $100 billion. It's insanity. It's just absolute insanity. And to add to the insanity, we have the person of Mike Johnson. So everybody knows I was so happy and so proud because Zelensky visited the General Dynamics plant in Scranton, what we used to call the Chamberlain plant, because at one point in its history it was the Chamberlain plant, I guess. But now it's General Dynamics, and they make 155 millimeter shells for Ukraine. About 40,000 a month come out of that plant. Well, Mike Johnson is calling for Ukraine to fire the ambassador, their ambassador to the U.S., because no Republicans were invited along on that trip. Now, I mean, in all honesty, a visiting head of state in a local district in a campaign year where it's a swing state and a swing district, it would have been a good idea to invite the local congressmen and senators in. It definitely would have been. But that apparently did not happen. And so Mike Johnson is making a big deal about it and calling for the firing of the U.S. ambassador from Ukraine. I mean, this is political theater, in my opinion. And I'll tell you that one thing about that Johnson, he does know how to rile up the troops. Yes, he does. After their meeting on Thursday, Biden and Zelensky are supposed to meet tomorrow, along with Harris is also supposed to have a separate meeting with Zelensky, in which he will unveil the plan for victory to them. Now, it does not look like he's going to meet with Trump, which I think is all for the best. Now, in addition to the plan for victory conversations happening, it is anticipated that following the meeting, the U.S. will announce a new tranche of $8 billion in aid for Ukraine. Now, I don't know if that's the $6 billion that's set to expire at the end of the month. Have they secured that funding somehow? Plus another $2 billion, or if this is a completely separate tranche of aid or drawdown from the $60 billion that Congress had allocated. One would think that it's the $6 billion that's about to expire plus $2 billion, but government is more confusing than that. So I could not get a good answer to that today. Final top-line news story today. I mean, I don't even know how to tell this story. It's so crazy. Clay, you'll appreciate it. This is a story for you, buddy. So this poor son of a bitch, this Russian soldier, right? Some private or corporal or whatever. Some workaday Russian soldier. He gets in trouble from his commander. I don't know what he did. It probably wasn't very much. And so the commander's punishment is to make him burn his own car. Something about the car, having a private car out at the front line, whatever, it's not entirely clear. But he was guilty of some violation in the commander's eyes. And so the commander's punishment was to have him cover his own car in gasoline and light it on fire. And so there's a video of him doing this, pouring the gas all over the car. What I did not see was a video of what happens next. Because by all accounts on Telegram, what happened next was they lit the car up. Look where the car's parked. It's parked in a field of dry grass, and he just poured 7 liters of gasoline all over it, or dried grass, rather. Well, the field goes up in a heartbeat, and then it catches on fire the tree line that the Russians are stationed in, that they have their positions in. And 4 of the Soviet-era MTLBs, those armored personnel carriers, amphibious assault vehicles, were lost. I mean, come on. Come on. I mean, first of all, the whole punishment aspect of it is so insane to me. You're going to make the guy, right? This is the thing. The Russians, after communism, the idea of private property is kind of fuzzy for them. And so having a guy burn up his own car, not having any rights over his own property, they think, like that's a reasonable thing to do, I guess. But then just the complete lack of situational awareness, that you're in a field at the end of summer where it hasn't rained yet in weeks. That grass is dry as fuck. And you've got all your men with their ammo and their arms and their vehicles in the tree line behind you. I mean, that's our Russia. That's our Russia. I want to give a big thanks. So that's my top line stuff, and we'll go to Q&A in just a second here. First of all, I want to thank all of you for being here. It's a pain in the ass. You're at home on TikTok. You come to YouTube. I appreciate it, really. Again, the sponsors of the lives this week and next are these 5 guys who I'm calling the board of directors: Ballerina Bobby, Dark Irish, Jason Willis Starnes, and Lars from Encino Tech. Gentlemen, I cannot thank you enough for all your support. Thank you. Other people I cannot thank enough for their support are the mods, who are just so incredibly on top of things: Cheyenne, Vanetta, Max Power, Jay, and Travis. And then thanks to Lars M., who's got the Discord server in the Alexievich archive; Nightshade, who has the Peter's Peeps public group on the Book of Faces, where these lives get shared. And I wanted to send a shout out to F and Hell too. With the board of directors having locked up all of the live sponsorships for last week and next week, which is only fair, believe me. With those guys locking up the live sponsorships for this week and next week, F and Hell PayPal'd me and said, hey, could I get a live or a video sponsorship instead? And I'm like, dude, yeah, you can get a video sponsorship. So video sponsorships are a benefit of the $50 Patreon, right? I would much rather you join the Patreon at the $50 level, but if you prefer, if you want to PayPal me $50 and say, hey, give me a video sponsorship, I'm all over it. I'm right there for you. And it would be a big help. It's a tough month, guys. It's definitely a tough month. Okay, that brings us to Q&A. How are we doing here? Okay, we got 10 minutes left. Make sure to please click the like symbol to like the live. Yeah, please. Thanks, Max. Who could have predicted tall, dry grass and a bunch of gasoline could lead to an out-of-control situation? Total freak accident. Is not the Russian also low on transport? Then why destroy it? Think that punished us? Yeah, it did, Lars. Yeah, they're running out of equipment, man. We've got evidence of M46 cannons being used. The 46 is for 1946. These fucking things have been in storage since they were retired when their ammunition was declared obsolete in 1975. That means they've been in storage for 50 years after being 30 years old. That's what they're sending their guys to the front with. How we doing? Probably won't have a calm night again. I don't know, Aunt. Last night was not an insignificant attack, right? 32 drones, 8 missiles. Was not an insignificant attack. Maybe tonight it'll be quiet. Not that it matters. I have to be up again early tomorrow. Thank you, Bobby, for everything, man. Dennis, I didn't have a chance to do the story of the ATM hacks. So Dennis, or D. Ellis down there, he says Russian banks got hacked again, and he's right. As a matter of fact, I believe that the cyber attack against the Russian ATM system is still in progress. That it's happening right now. You know, if you're in Moscow or St. Petersburg and you're trying to get money out of the bank, forget it. It's not you. It's not you. When does the fighting come to a standstill for winter? It never really does, Clay. At least not given the last winter. You know, what seems to happen is the mud season comes, and it becomes very difficult for anybody to move around or do much of anything. So everything slows down. You're forced to slow things down. Then everything freezes, and suddenly the tanks can move again, and then things pick up again, and you get the winter battles. Now, if the U.S. and our allies can deliver to Ukraine what they need in a timely fashion before the freeze comes, so that when the freeze comes and the possibility of maneuver warfare is once again on the table, there's every possibility that we could see the Ukrainians go on a counteroffensive that will change the face of what has been a static front line for 2 years now. As I understand it, I think that's what we should expect to happen. Okay, good. We got a couple minutes. Questions, comments, points of observation, personal need, anything from anybody? Bobby, Trump did bail on meeting Zelensky. Or it appears that way anyway. Some of the members of the campaign were a little dodgy about answering that question, but right now we don't know of any meeting scheduled between them. How do I get informed of lives on YouTube? Oh, pardon me. Dude, same bat time, same bat channel. 5 Eastern time, Eastern U.S. time, and every day, Monday through Friday. And it couldn't be more predictable. What do you think, Clay? You like the pictures? You like the graphical? This is a more, and I'm just learning, like you can see, I fixed the camera issue. So now we have an embedded camera that's always on top. Bobby, how is it possible that every question you ask sounds dirty? Pete, can Ukraine jet drones do the job of deep penetration? I'm not wrong, am I? Dude, I don't know. I mean, we don't really know that much about the jet drones. We don't really know what their capabilities are. my suspicion is that they're going to do a lot of good. They're going to do a lot of damage to essential infrastructure, and we're seeing that already. But I don't have the expertise to answer your question. I'm sorry. D. Ellis is saying, saw something earlier about how much oil production is down, but can't find the numbers now. If I'm not mistaken, the last number that I saw was 16%. The last number that I saw, so remember, now not oil production, but oil refining capacity. Production of crude oil is also down, but that's not related to Ukrainian attacks. The reduction in refining capacity is directly related to Ukrainian attacks on refineries. And to the best of my knowledge, the last number I saw was 16%. It's down by 16%. Oh, my buddy Dave. Hey, everybody. Say hello to my buddy Dave. Most of you here, actually all of you except Dave, I only know from the internet. Now, Dave, I know in real life. We're buddies. And he says, very helpfully, there's a notification bell to click, and if you subscribe to YouTube, we'll notify you. So hit that notification bell, Clay, to be notified every time I'm live. Oh, and Max Power took Bobby's and ramped it up. Oh, brother. They do need to take down the Crimea Bridge, and they will. I just don't think it's a priority because it's basically useless for military purposes, right? Only 5% of what normally went over that bridge is going over it now. So it's essentially neutered. Oh, you're talking about crude oil. Okay, then I'd like to see those numbers. Now, Ant, regarding the F-16s, as I understand it, there is an investigation ongoing into the death of the pilot and the crash of the first F-16 in Ukraine. It may be that that was a friendly fire incident. And if it was in fact a friendly fire incident or pilot error, neither of which is great to think about, neither of which is great to have to look at, right? But if it's either of those things, if the mistake was a Ukrainian mistake, then they're going to be extra cautious moving forward. There's going to be new protocols put in place. There may even have to be some interconnection point between infantry and Air Force to ensure that friend or foe identification is readily available to everybody in the field as well as in the air. And that's a tricky business. To the best of my knowledge, the F-16s are currently being used to shoot down missiles coming into the country. So every night when these Caliber cruise missiles come in, these Kinzhals, whatever, the pilots are up there shooting them down. That's my understanding of how the F-16s are being used. Now you think to yourself, well, that's a very limited use of the multi-role capabilities of that fighter jet. And you're not wrong. But the Ukrainian military has to integrate that new technology platform into their overall operations. And that is not an easy thing to do. And so you start small, right? The guys get good at intercepting missiles. The guys get good at flying the aircraft. It becomes an extension of them. They get good at it. You give them practice. You send them out on missions. And then you look at evolving new options for that multi-role fighter at a time when you know it is at the least amount of risk possible from your own people. That's going to be a consideration. Yeah, Japan is really stepping up, boy. Japan is really stepping up. And we saw that at the UN this week when Zelensky presented the Japanese foreign minister with the Ukrainian Order of Merit, and thanked them for all of the humanitarian aid that has come in already and that has been promised. And that's all, good night, Clay. And that's all amid the ongoing escalating tensions between Tokyo and Moscow over invasions of airspace and territorial disputes. So Japan could be a good friend to Ukraine, no doubt about it. All right, guys, it's after 1 a.m. here. And I really appreciate everybody coming and hanging out. Thank you. I think that probably this is a little better, richer graphical environment to be in. And so probably next week what I will do is I will continue to live stream here on YouTube with the PowerPoints, and then just talk into the TikTok camera too, and invite people to come over to YouTube. I don't know. I don't know what else to do. But there's a streaming software that lets you stream on multiple platforms simultaneously. StreamYard. And I guess there's a free version that will let you do that. So I'm going to take a look at that tomorrow or Friday, before Monday anyway. All right, ladies and gentlemen and other non-binary folks, thank you so much for your time, your attention, and your patience. Make it a great day.